Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with David Jacobs. David, I want to thank you for being on the show. You're a California business broker and got a lot of experience in this space, and I think we're going to have a fun conversation today.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Ron. I look forward to this conversation.
We start in the same place almost every time. I kind of jokingly ask people, you were born, now you ended up on a show about mergers and acquisitions. Could you fill out the gap in between? How did you end up on my show, man?
Well, there were a few years in between those stages, but um, I grew up in the Midwest and I lived on the East Coast for a while. When I came out to California in the mid '90s, I went into the corporate software world and worked at companies like Oracle and Siebel Systems, BMC Remedy, and SUSE Linux. And then I really made a career change and decided to pursue something entrepreneurial. I took over a family business, and it was my father's, and my mother and sisters were out of it. He had kind of a family emergency, and I stepped in. He sold commercial printing, almost exclusive catalog work, and worked with 4 printers and had a nice list of loyal customers. So it was a good business for him, and I saw an opportunity to expand it by creating some software. And that's what I did for 7 years. Whether the interest rate is 3% or 6%, these businesses are getting discounted at 20 to 25 or 30% in the valuation. I don't think it's really going to affect the valuation. I think it's just going to wash out the poor performers.
What industries are we looking at, and kind of, are they recession proof? Do you think that's the case across the, that you think that's a personal bias of mine, or you think that's the case a lot of buyers are going to take a second look at what they're thinking about getting into?
Well, I think it really depends on the type of buyer and the imagination. You had talked about coffee roasting, and I
Yeah.
would say, do you really want to own a coffee shop in like a downtown area where people may or may not be coming to work every day? Probably not a good business, but perhaps that's an opportunity to develop a coffee roasting business with one retail location and then ship those high margin beans all over the country. So,
I was kind of making the assumption you would end up dealing with a lot of divesters and stuff because where you're located. Do you get very many of those where the bigger companies are trying to divest of some software company or piece of a software company that they had bought that they don't really need?
um, that no, I
Okay.
haven't found that. It's usually just an owner operator, and the private equity funds are very active at cold calling and trying to engage in a non-competitive transaction.
Oh yeah.
And the best client of all for me is when one of those deals falls through, and the seller has just said, I just spent $50,000 in accounting and legal fees, and you're not interested in my business anymore. What just happened? That's a great client for me because they've been through the process and they know what to expect.
I
It
get
all
that.
creates competition. So private equity fund is not a long-term buyer. They're
Yep.
a buy, grow, and flip, right?
Oh yeah.
So
Yep. Yep.
if you're okay with your business being sold again in 5 to 7 years, that's potentially a good pool of buyers. But you have to remember that a private equity fund is really a financial buyer, and they're managing an asset portfolio. They're not operators. So they need somebody that's able to show up to work every day and run the business. And this is kind of the shortcoming of working with a private equity fund. If you look at like a family office, there's absolutely no intention of flipping. They're going to own that thing for 15 or 20 years. They want to grow it as big as they can, and then they're going to pull out distributions. The buyers that come with institutional capital, whether it's a private equity fund or a corporate strategic buyer or a family office, these guys are very sophisticated and very bright. And if you have the type of personality where you can work well with those types of people and in a collaborative way, I think that there's tremendous, 1+1 is 3, right? Because these guys are going to bring a perspective and a capital and access to talent that as a small business owner, there's no way you can come up with this by yourself.
Is there a horror story that you're willing to share? Like just something like terribly went wrong, and there, or maybe even something that has a great value learned, lesson learned that you'll avoid next time.
Well, I'm pretty new at this business brokering job. I've been doing it a little over 3 years now.
Hmm.
Most of my clients are great. I have a client now who's, we're in due diligence. This deal's going to close. I'm going to miss talking to him every week because the deal's going to close and we'll both be on to the next thing. They're great. I had a client in the past that just refused to listen. And I guess my takeaway from that is it's a partnership, right? I'm not your vendor, I'm your partner.
Mhm.
And I'm going to see all the dirty laundry that's hidden in your financial statements and understand both the good and great decisions that you've made along the way, and also see some of the mistakes that have been made. And if you don't have that kind of personality to work collaboratively, I'm not going to be able to find you a buyer. You're not me. You can't replicate that. So, one of the first things I talk to people about is just, okay, day one, where do I find the next new customer? How, are people calling in? Are they on our site? Do I have to go to a conference? How does that work? Walk me through that. And, I'm surprised by how many people don't have a process and a system in place that sales.
What can my audience or myself do for you? What is it? What's your next step in your journey? How can we help you move forward?
So, I'm always looking for sellers who own quality businesses that have a real reason for selling. And, I see it as a partnership. So, if you are a seller and you're considering exiting your business, it's time to retire or something's come up in life, I'd love to hear from you. If you want to introduce me, I'm open to referral fees. If you're a broker that's representing a buyer and you're interested in one of my clients, I'm here to get the deal done. So I'm glad to pay referral and fees like that, and share in some of the success fee that I earn through these transactions.